The tariffs we're seeing from the Trump administration are going to have a very deadly effect on America's ability to do more or less anything when it comes to business and innovation, at least for a little while. Let me explain why. So as you know, President Trump has imposed tariffs more or less across the board on some of our longest standing trading partners, countries like Vietnam and India that were trying to replace China as our geopolitical tensions with that country increased. China, of course, has been crushed right here. They've been hit really hard with tariffs that amount to over 124%. And all of that, just so we're clear, comes down as a tax on you and me. The companies that import those goods have to pay these tariffs in order to get them off the docks. And they, of course, to make good on their losses, have to pass that cost on to us. The estimate is that this is going to cost American families anywhere between 1.3% and 1.9% of their income over the coming year. That's something like a $3,000 extra expense per American family on average. That's what we're talking about. And this comes, of course, at a time when the latest estimate shows that about 37% of American families can't put together an extra $400 in an emergency. So it's a tough time to be asking people to pay as much more for imported goods as they're about to, especially considering how much of our lives depend on imported goods. Now, here's the thing. If you are an administration that wants to somehow revive American manufacturing, then your first step here, of course, is to just absolutely impose these in a blanket way. But you have to do two things. First of all, you have to be absolute about it. And second of all, you have to make a plan for helping companies to create the manufacturing base that they need. So here are the problems that these companies have bumped into in both those places. The first is that when it comes to a blanket installation of tariffs across these companies, that's not what's happening. Already, Tim Cook and Apple have secured an exemption for their iPhone manufacturing, not to mention laptops and other kinds of things. And that means suddenly that everybody's lining up to try and get an exception. Once one kid gets to go to the bathroom, everybody wants to go to the bathroom, right? And so you suddenly have company after company from sector after sector showing up and trying to get the White House to give them an exemption. The New York Times is reporting that on Monday, a whole bunch of retailers showed up, including Walmart, Target, others, to basically try to get the same kind of exemptions that they saw Apple get. And that is a huge distraction from the need of companies to basically think about the future. If you're the CEO of a company right now and you're trying to make plans about what to do with your money, well, you're not just going to spend your time, building an American factory or maybe investing even in a Mexican factory in spite of the tariffs. You're going to spend your time trying to get exemptions for your company when it comes to tariffs. And then the second thing there, right, is this question of whether you could actually then turn and become an American manufacturer. If you were one of these companies, could you do that? Well, company after company are telling the White House, we can't actually build the machines we would need to become a manufacturer of our own products unless we can import a certain number of them without tariffs. You need, the parts and so forth that we bring from abroad in order to even build the kinds of machines that you would need to make the computers and cars and the rest of it that President Trump seems to want Americans to make for themselves. There's no plan here, as far as I can tell. It seems to simply be a blanket tariff, which, looks good on a bumper sticker. I hit the world with tariffs, but it doesn't actually create the effect, the incentive to build stuff here in the U.S., at least not in the short term, that President Trump seems to intend. It also lays the groundwork for what could be some pretty serious corruption. If you're talking about, if you're a company that's trying to figure out how to get an exemption from this blanket tariff situation, and you see that, Tim Cook has been able to do so, there are many, many ways right now that you could, in theory, entice the inner circle of the White House to give you that kind of exemption. And that's why a couple dozen senators or more sent a letter to the Treasury Secretary and the Secretary of Commerce, along with the U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Jameson Greer, last week, basically saying, hey, your tariffs have created an incredible climate of corruption around the administration. They said strategic tariffs can be a tool to promote U.S. manufacturing, but these tariffs are not strategic, and they are creating a fertile ground for corruption. The senators write that there is an incredible number of opportunities for an unscrupulous company or an unscrupulous nation to try to enrich the Trump administration's officials or President Trump and his family themselves in order to win favor from the administration. They mentioned, for instance, they could pay for memberships at Mar-a-Lago, buy his cryptocurrency, invest in one of his many real estate ventures, reward his family members, and more. Flirting with the line, they write, of criminal bribery. It is this that other countries have seen before. If you look at India, for instance, which has imposed blanket tariffs in the past, but also offered certain exemptions to certain companies and industries, they bumped into a very similar situation in which suddenly companies were scrambling to get exemptions themselves, and a whole climate of corruption came out of that. You saw, company after company doing whatever they could to win favor from the power structure in New Delhi and get the exemptions they needed. So if you think about how this tariff situation is supposed to go, where it's supposed to create this blanket pressure on all these American companies to shift gears and start thinking about an American manufacturing base and changing their operations to be America focused, well, you need to basically create a situation in which they have absolutely no choice. You certainly can't give them the opportunity, the possibility that they could get out of it in some way. Really, if you think about it, a commentator, Robert Armstrong at the Financial Times, said the other day that a company is basically just an instrument for planning. It's just a big plan. And that when the board and the executives and everybody get together under the auspices of a company, they're just trying to make a plan for the future. And if you've worked in corporate America at all, you know that no decision is made on vibes. The decisions are made on a strategic plan. You have a contingency A, B, and C plan that informs all the decisions you make because you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders to do the best possible job to protect their money you possibly can. And that is why when you instead create an atmosphere of uncertainty, as these tariffs have created, you're creating an environment in which companies don't know what to do with themselves. You've had instances in which, according to one account out of the New York Times, you have a set of automakers trying to decide whether they should actually build factories in the United States or build factories in Mexico, and being told, oh no, we think you'll get exemptions, but then finding out that Mexico gets hit with with 10% tariffs just like everybody else. And then now we're hearing from President Trump that, in fact, he may offer automakers some sort of exemption down the line. And so this is why, in a recent study, the vast majority of company CEOs looking at this financial quarter and beyond said that their top strategic priority above all else was to reduce costs. That's pretty much it. This is not the sort of atmosphere of innovation you, in theory, want a company to be all about at this time. They're not talking about investing in their own resources. They're not talking about hiring new and smart people. They're talking about conserving cash, sitting tight, maybe, messing around with AI a little bit, but for the most part, they're held in a kind of paralysis, an American paralysis. That seems to be the thing that we are in. And final thought here, just to sort of tie this off. When we think about the effect that this is supposed to have on China, where in theory China and these other countries are supposed to come to the bargaining table and negotiate with the master deal maker, President Trump, who has boasted about his ability to make deals. He's now put this 90-day pause on a bunch of these tariffs in order to try to win concessions, and he claims, his press secretary claims, that there are 18 trade deals already on paper. I would expect that those trade deals will probably be with some of the friendlier, smaller, weaker nations. They won't be with China. American exports account for only 2 to 3% of Chinese GDP. They can do fine without exporting stuff to us if they want to. And they are cultivating a vast and very impressive internal domestic innovation machinery. Just this week, they've announced, for instance, that they have had breakthroughs in how we're going to make EV batteries in the future, being able to smash, they think, 60% more energy into the same size battery, meaning that you could have a much smaller battery, not have to have it take as much room in the car. But they haven't said who they're going to sell that to yet. They don't know who it's going to be. And if it's going to try and be exported to the United States, they're going to be hit with these big tariffs. You have a country like that sprinting ahead in innovation, Tim Cook famously said decades ago, or about a decade ago, that you can fill football fields with the number of engineers, high-level, skilled engineers that they have in China, whereas in the United States, it's hard to put a few into even a conference room. We have a big innovation problem in this country. And so at the same time that President Trump has injected all this uncertainty into the planning of companies such that they are just going to sit tight, hold down the fort, and hoard cash for as long as they can while laying people off. You have in China this sprinting ahead of an innovation culture and a infrastructure designed to foster that innovation. And those things together mean that this doesn't really look like it's going to go the way that President Trump seems to have intended.
Thanks everyone for watching. Your support means the world to us. So make sure you hit the like button and you subscribe to our channel to make sure that you never ever miss a video. We're live every day, 10 a.m. Eastern time. We drop even more content at 2 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Eastern. And if you want more Don Lemon Show content, we'd love for you to become a member of the Lemon community, where you will receive access to special community posts. You'll get exclusive content and members-only live shows. So head over to our channel page or click the join button on this video. Again, thank you for watching. We appreciate your love and your support, and we will see you next time.